This is DW News, live from Berlin. A ship carrying hundreds of tons of aid for Gaza finally leaves Cyprus. The Open Arms is the first vessel to use a new maritime aid route established to deliver more humanitarian aid into the besieged territory. Also on the programme, armed men cross from Ukraine into Russia to carry out cross-border raids. The fighters, who claim to be Russian citizens, say they took control of a village, which Moscow denies. Haiti's Prime Minister agrees to resign as gang violence sweeps the capital. Ariel Henry's announcement comes as regional leaders discuss a possible intervention. And more turbulence for US airline manufacturer Boeing after another incident involving one of its planes leaves dozens injured. I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to the programme. The first ship carrying aid to Gaza through a new sea corridor from Cyprus has departed. The Open Arms is expected to take a couple of days to reach the territory and has been hailed by the European Union as a signal of hope. The maritime corridor was set up by an international coalition, including Cyprus, the United Arab Emirates, the European Union and the United States.
A round of applause as the ship sets sail. It's the much-needed maiden voyage on a new maritime sea corridor operated by charities from this new hub in the Cypriot city of Larnaca.
Today our ship is leaving on what is a historic mission to the coast of Gaza. This ship is loaded with almost 200 tons of food to be distributed immediately to the people of Gaza.
Getting here wasn't easy. It took months of political talks to agree a plan under which Israeli officials oversee Cypriot security checks so the precious cargo can go straight to Gaza. But the journey ahead is complex too. The crossing is some 400 kilometres and the aid group operating the ship has been building a makeshift jetty to offload the aid off the Gazan coast. Most of the crossing will be tracked from this coordination hub in Larnaca. These are the eyes and the ears of the Cypriot government. From this room, officials can monitor the port and the maritime corridor so they can deploy rescue vessels should aid ships get into distress. It's a lot of painstaking work for one shipment, but the plan is to ramp up deliveries in the coming weeks.
There is more aid in Cyprus and, of course, ships that will steadily follow this first shipment, but we have to be cautious. We have to have the patience that this situation needs.
This is by no means the simplest way to get food to Gazans. Israel says it's committed to facilitating aid access, but it's faced accusations of blocking crucial supplies for civilians through land border crossings. So while this sea corridor brings some relief, the United Nations says it cannot replace traditional aid routes as famine looms where this journey ends.
Well, Germany's announced that it'll take part in aid airdrops into Gaza in an effort to ease the humanitarian crisis. The German Air Force will join Jordan, the US, Egypt, France and Belgium, who've already undertaken recent drops. Attention's shifted towards alternative aid routes as Israel limits overland deliveries. The UN estimates that a quarter of Gaza's population is now at risk of famine. DW political correspondent Hans Brandt told me more about when Germany plans to start the airdrops.
Well, the German government says as quickly as possible. That means within several days. These are German military transport planes that are stationed in France at the moment. The Germans say that is an advantage because France has already participated in these airdrops, so the German pilots can learn from their French colleagues how best to do this. And of course, there are always logistical matters involved, training the personnel involved and getting the aid to be made ready. That's likely to be in Cyprus. So the planes will fly from France to Cyprus, pick up material there and then go on to Gaza. So yes, as quickly as possible, but I would say less than a week.
Aid agencies have criticised this use of airdrops and warned that they're costly and inefficient. The aid sometimes ends up in the sea. So why is Germany doing this instead of sending aid by land?
Well, a spokesperson for the German Foreign Ministry said that, in fact, of course, Germany and everybody else, I guess, would prefer to continue supplying aid by land. But that, as we know, has become very, very difficult, and it's by far too little reaching the Gazan population, so that the situation there is getting more and more critical. So in desperation, all these other ways of trying to get aid into Gaza are being tried, including the airdrops as well as the sea route that is now being opened. But of course, there's also a sense of political frustration, I think one can say, both on the part of the German government and other Western governments and Arab governments, for instance, who are also participating, because these aid deliveries are made so difficult by Israeli controls, basically.
Just away from aid, there's another story making headlines, and that's Germany's involvement in the rescue of orphans from Rafah. And what more can you tell us?
Yes, indeed. That's a story that just emerged and I think should not, in fact, have become public. It was found out by Israeli media, I think, and it involves a German-run orphanage in Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip. Several dozen children, as well as some of the adults that were looking after them and their families, were evacuated from there with the help of the Israeli army, in fact, and have reached the West Bank, the Palestinian territories on the West Bank this weekend. It's something that the German government has been trying to organize for months, in fact, and it's now been successful. But it's something that was meant to remain confidential, because what's happened now is that especially the more right-wing members of the Israeli government are protesting vehemently against people from Gaza actually reaching Palestinian territories on the West Bank, even if they're children.
Thanks for that, Hans. At DW correspondent Hans Brandt in Berlin. Russian anti-government fighters say they've carried out cross-border attacks from Ukraine into Western Russia. The Freedom of Russia Legion and two other groups released this footage, which they say shows their fighters in Russia's Belgorod and Kursk regions. The groups say they crossed with tanks and have taken control of the border village of Tyotkino. Moscow denied the claims, saying that its military repelled the attacks. Well, Marina Myron is a military expert and postdoctoral researcher in the War Studies Department at King's College London. She told me more about these Russian anti-government paramilitary groups.
Well, the main one here is Free Russia Legion. So these groups are operating from the Ukrainian territory, and especially the Free Russia Legion. They have obviously former Russian prisoners of war who they claim have switched sides in order to fight against the Putin regime. However, these groups also claim that they have contract soldiers from the Ukrainian International Legion fighting for them as well, and that they fight in coordination with the Ukrainian armed forces. And it is to assume that they will be receiving military support as well, not just coordinating their activities. So these groups are seeking, obviously, to fight against the Putin regime, and they have made some incursions in the past year, and now we're seeing this year. Obviously, before the elections in Russia, they have increased their activities in the border regions again.
OK, so they say that they're coordinating with Ukraine. What does Ukraine say? Because the reports I've read say that the Ukraine says, well, they're nothing to do with us, they're acting independently. But that, of course, raises the question of where they're getting these advanced weapons and vehicles from.
Well, this is an interesting question, because the fact that they are coordinating with the Ukrainian forces is claimed by the members of the group. This is the information that has been provided by the BBC. However, we don't really know to what extent and with what units they are coordinating their activities and where they're getting their support from. However, given the fact that they are operating on the Ukrainian territory, it would suggest that perhaps maybe the Ukrainian military intelligence could be supporting such groups, because that might be in Ukraine's interest. But publicly, of course, you would have to distance yourself from any support. And we have seen similar scenario in 2014 when the Russians were also supporting the Donetsk People's Republic's militias without actually saying that they were doing that.
And so how active and effective have these groups been?
I think the effect of these groups is mostly in the informational domain, because if we look at the size of the groups and their activities, they haven't been very active. It is the first attack this year that came to our attention. The previous attack was last year, so they don't seem to be doing very much. However, the timing of this incursion, coupled with the drone strikes reported on the Russian territory and hitting an oil refinery, that makes a lot of sense that before the election, there is this attempt to unsettle the population, to maybe sway the population away from Putin, and to show them that Putin and his special military operation, that it is harming Russia. And this is why these people are fighting for a different Russia. So it's more about the information and psychological effect rather than any sort of military effect, because these groups just don't have the military capabilities in order to challenge the Russian armed forces. Because if it becomes a threat to national security, of course, the Russian government will make sure to mobilize more forces and send them to the border region. So from that perspective, I don't think that they pose a serious challenge. It's more of a distraction, I would say.
Understood. Thanks very much for talking us through that, Marina Miron from King's College London.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so a quick look at some more stories making headlines now. Romania's President Klaus Iohannis has announced his bid to succeed Jens Stoltenberg as Secretary-General of NATO. That puts him against outgoing Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who's already got the backing of the US, Britain, France and Germany, the four biggest powers in the Western military alliance. Travellers in Germany suffered double trouble today as train drivers and Lufthansa cabin crew went on strike. Most of the country's rail services were cancelled in a continuing dispute over shorter working hours and higher pay for drivers. Hours later, major disruptions hit air travel as cabin crew went on strike for better pay. The Sudanese army says it's made significant gains in its 11-month civil war against rebels, calling themselves the Rapid Support Forces. The army recaptured parts of the second city, Omdurman, just across the Nile from the capital Khartoum, including the symbolically important headquarters of Sudan's National Broadcasting Corporation. Now to Haiti, where the situation is continuing to worsen despite Prime Minister Ariel Henry announcing that he would step down. The Prime Minister said he will leave the job as soon as the Transitional Presidential Council is created. Politicians and crime bosses are now said to be jostling for power. Haiti has been described as being at a tipping point. Armed gangs have been demanding the Prime Minister's resignation for weeks as they unleashed deadly violence. Scores of people have been killed and more than 15,000 are homeless. The country's main ports are closed and with supplies of food and water dwindling, time to prevent a humanitarian disaster is running out.
Haiti is rapidly descending into anarchy. Violence in the capital, Port-au-Prince, continues to escalate, and armed gangs now control large swathes of the city. The alliance of gangs warned of civil war if Prime Minister Ariel Henry did not step down. And with the international airport closed to all flights, he's been stranded in Puerto Rico, unable to return. At an emergency summit, the group of Caribbean nations known as CARICOM concluded that the troubled nation needed new leadership, a multinational security force, and money. The Prime Minister apparently got the message and made this statement.
Last night, the Council of Ministers agreed to put a transitional presidential council in place. The members of the council will be selected in agreement with different sectors of the national life. The government I am running will remove itself immediately after the establishment of said council.
It came shortly after US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Washington would double aid to Haiti, including another $100 million for an international security force to restore order.
We support the plan to create a broad-based, inclusive, independent presidential college. Second, enable the swift deployment of the multinational security support mission. And third, through that deployment, through a reinforced Haitian National Police, create the security conditions that are necessary to hold free and fair elections.
To Haitians stuck in the middle of gang violence for weeks, these CARICOM-backed promises mean very little. What they want is a solution driven by Haitians.
CARICOM cannot do anything for us. It's like when you run for the rain and end up falling in the mud. The only thing I can say is that Ariel Henry is out forever. He cannot do anything for us anymore.
Haiti has not held an election since 2016. As foreign leaders scramble to find a solution, the question looms: who could be up to the task of governing Haiti?
Well, Antoine Jeune is head of the Haiti mission of the German humanitarian aid agency, Diakoni. Welcome to DW. So as we've been hearing there, gangs are controlling access to the ports and the capital's airport, which is where the critical supplies are distributed to the rest of the country. What sort of effect is this having?
Yes, indeed. This is an ongoing situation in Haiti and Port-au-Prince for quite some time. But since the recent events, violence has increased, gun control over critical infrastructures and supplies has increased. And in the same time, the police capacity to mitigate this has decreased. It has an important impact on the population because most of them are relying on daily casual labor for their income. So when the road access and supply are blocked, it increases all prices, starting for the fuel that is needed for local transportation for people to reach market and sell their products. The other aspect involves personal security. With the ongoing violence, every time you leave your home for your work or for your personal supply, you take a risk of being attacked, kidnapped, or fall in the middle of a gunfight between the police and the local forces. So people are really desperate now, and they look for safety and support in this critical time.
And what has your agency been able to do?
So we are working in Haiti since 2005. We focus mainly in livelihood, food security, humanitarian assistance, and protection. So more recently, with the deterioration of the situation in Port-au-Prince, we decided to start some protection activity to support people, mainly women and children facing the gang violence and left their home. So we are implementing the project with two partners. One partner is OFAVA, which is a woman-led organization specialized in protection activity. So they are providing emergency shelter for women and children affected by violence. And the other one is ORA, which is a local humanitarian organization working mainly in basic needs and psychological support for the people affected by the violence.
And those you are able to go about your business and do your work unmolested by these gangs?
I mean, it's a day-to-day situation. Every day we are looking for the situation. We see which roads are open, what is the situation, what is the level of violence, and if we can access to our office, we are discussing with our partners if they can access to the emergency shelters or running their operation. So really, it's really depend on the ongoing situation. We cannot really plan for long, but we are used also to that, and we are dealing with this situation day by day.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Antoine Jeune from the German aid agency Diakoni in Haiti. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, a former employee of the US plane maker Boeing who turned whistleblower has been found dead. Coroners say John Bennett died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He'd previously raised concerns about problems with Boeing's 787 Dreamliners, including problems with quality control and failed tests. Mr. Barnett was also involved in a long-running legal battle with the plane maker. Meanwhile, a new incident involving a Boeing Dreamliner could further compound safety concerns after dozens of people on a flight from Australia to New Zealand were injured. On Monday, the Dreamliner, operated by Chilean airline LATAM, suddenly plunged mid-air, causing passengers to be thrown around the cabin.
Grounded in Auckland, New Zealand, the plane that experienced what the airline is calling a technical failure. Seen here wearing headphones, Brian was one of the passengers on board the Boeing 787 Dreamliner.
A massive jolt happened, and I was awakened, and I looked up to see the gentleman that was sitting next to me on the roof of the plane. It was insane. I thought I was dreaming.
The sudden movement threw many without seatbelts from their seats.
The plane just dropped really suddenly out of the blue. Everyone started screaming, crying. People were launched out of their seats.
I saw people flying. They weren't wearing the seatbelts. The people that were in the toilet hit the ceiling. Same thing happened to the cabin crew. Emergency crews were quick to respond to the incident. More than a dozen ambulances headed to Auckland Airport to meet the incoming flight. 50 people were injured. Now, experts are examining the black boxes to find out what caused the incident. The airline says it's working with officials to support the probe. It's only the latest in a string of safety incidents troubling the U.S. plane maker Boeing.
Now, Jeff Wise is a science journalist who hosts the podcast Deep Dive MH370, which deals with the mysterious disappearance of the Malaysia Airlines flight in Southeast Asia a decade ago. Welcome to DW. So now we have investigators from Chile's aviation authority on their way to New Zealand to look into this latest Dreamliner incident. Talk us through what they'll be looking for.
Well, this kind of thing does happen from time to time. And the causes can be various. They're often related to autopilot malfunctions. Sometimes the automated system might be set to the wrong setting, and then something is changed, and then the plane responds by veering dramatically and violently, frankly. And we had a case last year here in the United States where a woman was in a private jet where something similar happened. Her husband and son were strapped into their seats. She wasn't, and the plane's cabin moved so violently that she was killed, actually. Fortunately, that didn't happen here. You know, my guess is, as someone who's read about various incidents like this in the past, probably doesn't have anything specifically to do with the 787. However, Boeing is under such a cloud right now that all of these bad things that are happening that are linked only by the fact that they have the Boeing name attached all become kind of lumped together. This is a bad situation to be in from a public relations perspective.
Okay, so more Boeing bad news is the death of this whistleblower who raised concerns about the Dreamliner and Boeing's manufacturing processes. And what did you think when you heard the news about John Barnett's mysterious death?
Well, of course, it's tragic, and of course it's going to raise questions. Again, there seems to be a sort of vague link between Boeing and this terrible thing happening. Whether the suicide was linked to, this lawsuit, he was, a little bit of context, he was involved in a whistleblower lawsuit against Boeing. He had gone from his home in Louisiana to South Carolina, and he was in the process of giving depositions in this lawsuit. He was supposed to turn up for the deposition that morning. He didn't show up. They looked for him, and he was found dead in his truck, having presumably committed suicide. This is all very unfortunate. We don't really know anything at this point about why he committed suicide, but it clearly looks bad.
Right. And another Boeing plane under scrutiny, the 737 MAX 9. US regulators have completed their audit 2 months after a door panel blew off one of the planes mid-flight. What have they said?
Yeah, so this story started with the beginning of the year. It's really been an annus horribilis for Boeing. Of course, everyone remembers that door plug flying out in the Pacific Northwest, and the airplane manufacturer has really been under scrutiny since then. So, and the New York Times yesterday just released these findings that the FAA had been auditing the production process, and they found that like a third, specifically 33 out of 89 audits, Boeing failed. So
Right.
the safety procedure that was supposed to be in place, they failed. And that seems like a pretty high percentage, frankly.
Thank you for that, science journalist Jeff Wise.
Thanks.
And the arrival of spring means cherry blossom season in Japan. That's a huge draw for tourists. But next month, visitors will no longer be able to enter the famous geisha districts in Kyoto. Mass tourism has become a nuisance for the city, and geishas have complained of harassment.
Cherry blossoms are blooming yet again in Japan, and the frenzied rush of tourists has begun. In Kyoto, residents say visitors have become a headache. They behave poorly, and they harass the geishas. The district's council says it doesn't know what else to do but ban visitors from these private alleys and block people from taking photographs.
I think it's very good to ban to take the pictures of here in the area, because
the privacy of the girls.
The privacy of the girls, of the
good.
women.
Not all tourists agree with that.
I wonder why it's being enforced. To me, this is a unique heritage area, I guess, that people want to enjoy and would like to photograph the architecture.
Visitors to Japan often confuse geishas for prostitutes, when geishas are in fact highly skilled performers of Japanese dance and music. Authorities hope the new ban will create a safer space for them, devoid of foreigners acting like paparazzi.
Just time to remind of our top story at this hour. A ship carrying 200 tons of food to Gaza has left a port in Cyprus after multiple delays. It's the first vessel to use the new maritime corridor set up to bring humanitarian supplies to the territory. Just a few moments, I'll be back with The Day. Today, taking a closer look at the mayhem engulfing Haiti. Now the Prime Minister says he'll go. Will the gangs lay down their weapons? That's The Day with me, Phil Gale, in just a moment.